Matisse once replied to André Verdet in 1952 about the paper cuts they were contemplating, "The dimensions of a canvas matters not. What I always want to give is a sensation of space." When we observe such a work, there's nothing like an illusion of space, depth, or extensum. Perhaps it is only implicit, the artist pointing towards the very economy of the frame at work in his practice, or the decorativeness involved in the disposals expositions mode. But how could we define a space made by painted or cut-out shapes, materials, and layers? Perhaps to start our inquiry, we could use Greenberg's division within American and European painting. Division instituted on a formal level between a three-dimension illusion and a literal three dimensions. When we observe Greenberg's examples, we have on one hand painter using what he describes as a homeless representation, defined as a plastic and descriptive painterliness that is applied to abstract ends, but which continues to suggest representational ones. On the other hand, furtive bas-relief that relies on the non-painterly use of the line and at the same time the monochromatic effects that do not need the coherence achieved through tangible representation, because they have the coherence that belongs automatically to literally three-dimension space. This often criticized repartition will be echoed in Michael Fried's Art and Objected about the concept of opticality he finds defined in two singular ways within Greenberg's numerous articles and essays. Those ways, I quote, are not always distinct in his writings. One way pointing towards a global look upon modern painting, from Manet to Impressionism until today, via Mondrian, and the other embodied in the cleavage between homeless representation and furtive bas-relief. Jean Clay notices in Fried's approach from Greenberg's concept of opticality the isolation of tactile values from the optical values that are carrying perspectival illusion and could promote effects of depth and contrast. Clay also charges Fried to have misinterpreted Merleau-Ponty about the impossible division between sight and touch. For my part, I would like to underline that Fried noticed this same impossibility in the phenomenology of perception from Merleau-Ponty. We can find proof in a note from Fried that this cleavage is not absolute for him, as Clay supposed it. I quote, "Sight and touch open the same space." In 1912, in About Cubism, Albert Glaise and Jean Metzinger already mentioned the necessity of tactility in the focus of space in painting. I quote, "To establish a painterly space, we must use our tactile sensation and all our other faculties. It is our entire personality which, while contracting and dilating, transforms the planarity of the tableau. Painterly space is defined as a sensitive passage between two subjective spaces." I mostly agree on this last point. To approach the very notion of space within painting, we have to approach it as both optical and tactile, or haptic, as observed by Gilles Deleuze in Mille Plateaux. It also points towards what Bonnefoy will call beatings of space, systole, diastole, at one side defined as an opening or as the neutralization of the planarity of the support, and at the other side as a display of physical properties and textures growing out of the frame and the surface. Those two sides are inseparable. At the turn of past century, Fauvism reinvested the tableau within its materiality. This reinvestment can be identified in the organization of porosities between the painted and unpainted surfaces. The sublayer is shown, put in front, re-engaged. It opposes its dermis to the flatness and the glaze of a classical varnish. To quote Jean Clay in La Peinture en Charpie, Matisse and Verlaert assume painting as a thickness, a leaf removal, an interpenetration of the layers, interference of the stratums, performing the uprising of the bottom, its eruption like a surface leprosy. Untouched zones or scratched with the handle of the brush, scrubbed by the dry brush hairs, tint washed away with turpentine, drips, textural cataclysm, persistent erratic pencil marks. For the author, Fauvist painting has integrated some of drawing's procedure on a formal level, enhancing irregularities and rawness of the materials. Wölflin's term of malerisch, readapted by Greenberg in post-painterly abstraction, could apply for Fauvism. Shapes are dissolute in color, and volumes find themselves expressed by masses and not by outlines. Matisse told his close friend and jazz editor Thériade in 1936 about Fauvism, painting are refinements, subtle degradations. They are calling nice blues, nice reds, and nice yellows, materials that are moving the sensual underside of man. If Matisse seems to insist on the sensuality of his practice, and we shall certainly not deny this, I would rather insist on the terms subtle degradation linked here with the tableau itself. I think Fauvist heritage to contemporary practices happens on three fronts. Firstly, the investment of the sublayer or subjectile. Secondly, the concept of degradation. And thirdly, the abandonment of the projective role of drawing and painting. When we closely observe Paysage à Collioure from 1905, we are struck by the importance of the grain of the canvas pushed forward. The dynamic display of painted and unpainted zones dilutes the neo-impressionist cover role that Signac had inherited from Seurat. The capture of volume still evocated in 1904's Lux Calme et Volupté disappears along with the dense brush strokes. The singularity from each of those marks is enhanced and echoed by the centripetal force at hand in this landscape. The cloth is unusually left untouched, sharing its roughage and weaves with the painted surfaces. The goal aimed at by Matisse is to withdraw the delineation between background and pattern, his interest for precious textiles and their integration into his construction system as both pattern and surface allows us to think so. If we can't deny the importance of Cézanne's lessons to Cubism, we could at least reconsider the role played by Braque's Fauvist period on the movement's early developments. When we look at the collaboration between Braque and Frieze in 1906 within the clearer chromatic dilution enhanced by the whirly construction, we can catch a glimpse of the 1907 Viaduc à l'Estaque. Cubism's genesis lies somewhere between this geometrical landscape, Picasso's philosophical brothel, Cézanne's lesson, and Fauvism's reinvestment of the materiality of the surface. Where Fauvism seemed erratic, Cubism would retighten the surface, showing a high technicality and a reflective decantation of both influences and models. Cubism, in its analytic phase, institutes the very idea of disposal within the display of painted faces, an idea already strongly present in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and in Georges Braque's landscape. But what did Picasso and Braque do about the Fauvist theoretical positioning, assuming painting as a thickness? How did Cubism create its depth after Fauvism had cracked the surface wide open? Perhaps a part of the answer to this question can be found in both Greenberg's and Max Laureau's studies about Cubism. Laureau's analysis focused on the display of elements somehow regardless of the contribution of typographies and trompe-l'œil. But he understood quite well the formal issues of depth in Cubism. I quote, "In a Cubist representation, the depth implies that faces or fragments are disposed in such way that they hide each other, the ones in front partially covering others which are behind. The depth is generated by the partial superposition, contrariwise, the lack of depth is due to the non-superposition or juxtaposition. To create an effect of depth with phase shifts, Cubist representation had operated exclusively by superposition and juxtaposition of pieces." Laureau's point of view can somehow seem naive, but is in fact based on a very pragmatic observation. The very system Cubism had developed to respond to the geometrical exigencies from Cézanne's lesson and to assume painting as a thickness in the same impulse was built on the opposition between juxtaposed fragments and superposed ones. Greenberg, on his side, focused on the introduction of trompe-l'œil by Braque in the Cubist construction mode. He pointed towards the abrusedness of analytic Cubism around 1910, explicitly writing that Cubism was threatened by flatness. Implicitly, he also announced Braque and Picasso reaction that would drive Cubism to its synthetic phase around 1911. Backgrounds and models are treated more unequally, and the flatness of the surface becomes signified by the typographic elements opposed to the atomized volumes. Picasso and Braque both enhanced the lighting put on volumes by introducing more colors, where in their analytic phase, every volume was still lit separately. Greenberg's point of view can be confirmed by comparing 1909 painting with those painted after 1910 and until 1912. The textures and their typographies, the integration of trompe-l'œil is in fact an addition of signs meaningful within their textures and their typographies, but also a reminder of the planarity of the surface opposed to the depth of the volumes. When we combine those two analyses, we can more pragmatically focus on the collage from 1912 as a procedure that engaged the very notion of space within non-figural painting. The act of cutting and gluing can be seen as a solution to the problem posed by the emerging flatness within the painting of 1910. The procedure leads Cubism towards a more efficient economy of the background and the figure. We can see two examples here. In 1914, where Cubism had integrated the elements, typographies and trompe-l'œil.